to The Thriving Mama, the podcast that teaches you not just how to survive, but to thrive in motherhood. I'm your host, Dr. Stephanie Davis. Today, we're going to be talking about perimenopause. When I say that word, how do you feel? If you feel icky or gross or don't even know what to think, you're not alone. It feels like such a dirty word in Western society with all of the negative connotations around the loss of beauty, vitality, sexuality, and more. Get this. Globally, in 2022, women spent $22 billion on menopause and $60 billion on anti-aging because we're constantly being told by the media that we're not good enough. You know what? Forget that BS. We are going to rewrite this narrative. We don't have to buy into this. And I'm so excited to have one of my best friends on today, Brie Wieselman. And we're going to talk about how we're going to do that. Today, we're going to discuss supporting hormones and mental health to make the perimenopause transition smoother, the myths and truths of hormone replacement, and unpacking the narratives that we've been fed our entire lives as women. It's my pleasure to introduce Brie Wieselman, a licensed primary care provider and CEO of the Reverse Age Method, a groundbreaking anti-aging program for women over 35 who want to get and stay lean, visibly rewind skin appearance, reclaim all-day energy and brain power, and stop perimenopausal hormone symptoms in their tracks. For the past 14 years, she has paved the way for quality functional care by empowering clients with a personalized map for understanding and transforming their hormones. Besides being an expert in hormone balance and fertility optimization, she specializes in helping people with digestive issues as well and rebuilding a solid bulletproof microbiome. Want to chat and get more personalized support? I'm offering podcast listeners a free 20-minute Thriving Mama check-in where we'll evaluate your physical, mental, and emotional health and provide useful resources to help you on your journey. You'll find that link in the show notes. I'm so excited to have my amazing, wonderful, brilliant friend, Brie Wieselman, here today. And as you know from the intro that I gave, she has a world of experience and she and I go back a long way. We've gone through so many things like job changes, ups and downs, births, deaths, marriages, divorces, so many things. And I am just beyond excited and grateful to have her here today. So thank you, Brie.
Thanks for having me and thanks for that intro. And yeah, when you say that, hearing those words, I'm like, yeah. Oh yeah, it really has been.
It has been. We have been through a lot together.
Fertility
yes.
stuff.
Oh yeah. The fertility stuff.
Pandemic.
All the many things. Yeah. I often will reflect back on my relationship with people. And I feel like you and I, we've seen a lot together.
We have so many parallels. There's always these parallels. So, I love that.
Yeah. So
thanks for having me.
You are so welcome. And I'm so glad to have you. So Brie, I know I talked about this before, but Brie is like a hormone goddess. And I don't say that lightly. She really does understand the nuances of hormones, not just from a biochemical standpoint, but also from the mental standpoint and the emotional, spiritual standpoint. There's so much more than what society tends to label hormones and what it is to be a woman. So we're going to unpack a lot of things, but the first thing I want to really talk about is perimenopause, because I feel like societally people don't really, or women, I should say, don't really understand what it is, what is happening. Give us I want you to talk about the reality of when it happens, what the first signs are, just walking into it. Because I know even me, knowing all the stuff I know, I was like, my hormones were shifting and weird things were happening, but I was like, oh, is this perimenopause? So if you could give us clarity on that, I would love it.
Love to. So the interesting thing is that most of us don't know when we're starting perimenopause. And it's not because we don't have the data to tell us about it. It's just that this has been such a blind spotted area of health and wellness, because this is really perimenopause and menopause are truly I think, the epitome of when like we talk about preventative health measures being the most effective. We can't medicalize this. This is not a disease state. This is a natural transition. We spend a third to a half of our life in menopause. We should, and you know how much training, and this is not, please don't take this as finger pointing or shaming or blaming the physicians, but in the medical training programs for a family practice MD or a OBGYN, do you know how many hours of training they get in perimenopausal and menopausal hormone management? 0. There was a survey done recently and the med schools offer 0. So like, who are we supposed to turn to? Who are the experts, right? And it's these people like you and I who are kind of a little bit, I'm not going to say fringe, but it's not your family practice MD. And that's a shame because this is something that's going to impact, 4 billion of us by the year 2030. Not a small amount of people. And we should have a guide. There's no reason we don't have a guidebook or the map for this because we know exactly what happens. So basically, when people typically start to feel this is going to be in their late 30s, early 40s. And I would say what I do want to point out though, is that I have plenty of women that I'm working with in my practice who are like 34, sometimes 32, where they're having symptoms. And when I correlate those symptoms and also happen to run hormone assessments with them, I'm like, oh, this is actually perimenopause. Like this is what's happening. And my theory on that is that a combination of the generalized level of stress that we've normalized as baseline and unresolved trauma, which that's like, speaking to the choir here, and our lack of systems for grief and trauma in this culture.
Yes.
As well as our lack of systems for community in this culture. Like even the literal way we structure our cities is alienating. Like I was just in Barcelona and Malaga visiting family, like in the fall with my boyfriend. And I just remember thinking like, oh, people aren't spending 2 hours commuting. They're like taking the train and they're walking to the train. And then they, after dinner, go out and walk on the caminas, which are these like roadways that are paved with no cars. And you see multi-generations out there doing things and you're just around humans, right? It's built into the design of the cities. We don't have that here so much. And that's a big source of illness and disease or imbalance, I'm going to say, not like necessarily illness and disease, but the subtle imbalance too. And then the other factor is the profound abundance of endocrine disrupting toxins that are infiltrating our environment that are totally out of our control at this point. Those things are impacting our genetics in a way where we are hitting perimenopause earlier and earlier. Okay. So, but standard, we're going to say like anyone 35 and up, if you're having some of these symptoms, it's probably, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck. So I'd say that the couple of symptoms that I see and hear about first are a generalized sense of overwhelm relative to what you used to have the bandwidth for. That's first and foremost. The second one is a tiny bit of weight increase, not in all women, but in a lot of women, unrelated to, especially in the crowd who's like, I focus on health. I eat pretty clean. I work out. These things have always kept me relatively lean. I'm doing the same things. What gives? My jeans are tighter. Yeah. Okay, that. And the third main one is sleep problems. My sleep isn't quite as good. I can't fall asleep. I can't turn my brain off, or I'm waking up. I go back to sleep, but I'm just waking. What the heck is that? So those are the first symptoms. There's other symptoms you could have first, but those things people often aren't correlating to menopause at all. Yeah. They're just like, I don't know, right?
I relate 100%. Like that was me. I remember measuring my hormones before I had Camden, who's my 11-year-old. And so I was like, I feel like I was like 34 when I did it. And I was astonished. I'm like, I look like I'm menopausal because all of my hormones were below range, like all of them, every single one. And the sleep hadn't impacted me at that point, but a couple of years later it did. Like, I was just like, I can't sleep. Yeah. And I didn't attribute it to that.
If you want to know what perimenopause or menopause is going to feel like, there's nothing like a postpartum woman to illustrate that, especially one who's breastfeeding.
Oh, I know.
Because essentially our hormones are menopausal at that point. So that is what it's going to feel like. And so, talk about the overwhelm and the poor sleep. Yes, there's somebody helping contribute to that, but all those things and like vaginal dryness and lack of libido and, okay. So it doesn't have to go down like that, but also like, yeah, that is basically an appetizer version of what happens hormonally. And that, which also is something we could be supporting women better around.
But, another topic. I know that's a whole other can of worms, right?
The end of that talk is get some progesterone.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Moving on.
Yes.
So, anyway, But, I digress. But to your point, it's just kind of like I remember similarly looking at photos of myself and being like, and I've always been somebody who happened to look younger. It's just genetic, looked a little bit younger and brown skinned, like multiple things. But I remember now, like recently looking back and being like, oh my God, what happened to my skin? What happened to my hair? What happened to what happened? I don't even recognize that person, And that's what I hear women say when they're like struggling with this change. They feel, yesterday had a woman say, I feel like I got dropped in an alien body. Or I can hear women say these words. I don't know how to explain it. Like they'll tell me some symptoms. Like, I don't know how to explain it. I just don't feel like myself. And I just want to feel good again.
Yes. That's exactly that. Yeah, that is exactly it. Like the moment that you're looking in the mirror and you don't feel like yourself, that is probably like the wake up and hello that you're entering into the perimenopausal world.
Yeah. And what's confusing too, there's a couple of things. So number one, if we wait until the time we're 50 and having hot flashes and night sweats, we've missed so much opportunity to support our bodies. And it's not our fault. No one's been telling us that, right? The menopause is having a moment now. Thank God, but we're having a dialogue that's been desperately needed and it's going to be better in 10 and 20 years than it is now. But my heart breaks for all the women who came before us, And then the other piece of that is that what can be confusing is that we're usually in the sandwich generation in these moments of our lives, meaning often we are, maybe we're taking care of kids. We're usually, in some kind of a relationship where there's household stuff. We also often have some kind of a career or we're full-time caring for the kids. And maybe our parents are starting to need more support. And so it's just basically this moment of marathon in many women's lives. And so it can be confusing because you're also just kind of like, well, am I overwhelmed because of all this external stuff? Oh, and the world almost ended. Oh, and a million things that are heartbreaking in the world today. But right? And so we don't always make this hey, this is endogenous also. My hormones are meeting the world in a way that is leaving me unsupported.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's important because we were talking about it before we got on. The fact that women are fed so many messages societally. And what it all comes down to is in the end, you're not worthy. You don't matter that much. That's exactly what it comes down to. And it's that's one of my things. I'm we need to change this narrative, not only for those of us who are in that space right now, but for our kids and our kids' kids, the future generations. This needs to change. We need to stop this.
Yeah. I think about that all the time. What am I role modeling to my daughter? Right? Rewrite these stories that once you have a family, you don't go out and play. And, I go out dancing.
Yes. I love that.
I'm going to do that. She knows it's important. Sometimes I take her with me. Sometimes I go by myself. Whatever it is, kids need, that's just one example, but how we take care of our bodies and how we walk in those bodies. So this is something I always talk about women. They'll come to me and I want to actually circle back to, this leads me back to what you're saying about worth. But one of the things that commonly happens, there's kind of these 4 pillars of change that happen with women that are what we get concerned about and want to stop the symptoms of. So there's the piece about I want to feel better and not have these symptoms. And then once that stuff's resolved, there's the what do I want, right? So those are a spectrum. But the what I don't want usually looks like my skin and appearance is changing and I'm all of a sudden feeling like the aging that I'm visibly seeing is accelerating. There's my weight is creeping up or my body composition and shape is changing in ways that I don't feel are related to what I'm doing and I don't like it. And then there's energy, brain cognition and mood and sleep. Okay. And then there's things stuff we call menopausal hormone symptoms, period related stuff, heavy bleeding, erratic periods, sweats, flashes, migraines that are increasing that, and sex drive and vaginal changes and things like libido, which are meaningful and important here, critical. That matters in my book. It's not this aside, kind of oh, and by the way, that'd be nice. No, that is part of who we are. This is not, we fall off a cliff and lose our sexual and sensual identity. This is actually the runway for this amazing chapter of our life in that regard, if we want it to be. But people will come to me and go, and some women are oh, I gained 60 pounds and I'm terrified of where this is going for my health. That's one thing. But there's a lot of us who are I hear this all the time. I gained 10, 15 pounds or 20 pounds on my frame. It's not tragic, but I don't know. And I guess, I don't care about it that much and whatever but these other things. And I'm whoa. And they'll tell me there's some kind of disclaimer about vanity. And I just want to give everyone permission Because at this moment in our life, like first and foremost, I have no agenda at all that I should like be making women who are healthy at a size 8 into a size 2. That is just ridiculous. And there's a lot of that messaging, right? Like all the social media images in the world of like, in order to be sexually attractive or have worth as a woman, you need to look like this. But also the dual messaging is that, but you also shouldn't care about that because that's superficial. But don't care too much about looking like that. Make it look effortless and look like that. And don't act like you care, which is some bullshit that I just am like, yeah, that's toxic. Let's not do that. So how about we rewrite that script to be like, hey, in our 30s, 40s, 50s, at any age, really, we should be, I think it's defined by, am I allowed to swear?
Yeah. Oh, totally. Go for it.
So there is this natural inherent thing, and it's part of the neurodiversity that's acquired in the brain shift related to the hormones. That's like, I give less fucks. I also truly believe it's a psychospiritual evolutionary adaptation, and I'll go back to why. But there's I give less fucks, which is good, because what that means really in real speak, if we dissect it, is like, I'm being more discerning about who and what gets my energy, because I'm reprioritizing what I truly want and what is actually pleasurable for me. So female species in studies organize themselves around pleasure when they are in balance, which it benefits the tribe, benefits the whatever animal you are. And so pleasure, which is healthy, selfish, pleasure can be literal, like sensual and beauty and pleasure and foods and like that. But it also can be self-actualization.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so I think there's this moment where we are just refining and refocusing and eliminating things that don't work for us now at this point. And so what's funny is like with regard to that, weight piece or like how I look and feel in my clothes, it's like, yeah, we should all be more in possession of ourselves. We should hopefully know ourselves better. We should have hopefully kind of gone through the trials and tribulations of making choices and decisions about what we wanted our lives to look like in certain ways. And at this point, we should also, ultimately just like love ourselves no matter the what. That's true. But we can also, at the same time, that can be true. And we can also go, and I still want to look cute. And I want to put on these clothes and walk out the door and be like, I don't have to think too much about that. I feel great. And, that's not wrong. Like, it is okay to acknowledge that we don't, that we want our skin to have a glow or whatever it is, So for whoever needed to hear that.
I know. I am with you 100%. I was at a retreat this weekend, and like I told you before, we thought it was going to be very business focused, and it had a tad of that, but most of it was like addressing a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, all of the narratives that we've heard, but also like as a woman going through these transitions, that it's okay. It's okay to want to still look beautiful and feel beautiful. And it's okay. You can do that in a natural and holistic way if you want to, that can happen. And because when somebody had made the comment that she was just like, yeah, she's like, I remember, she's like, when I was younger, I used to, not that I loved attention from men, but she's like, men noticed me. She's like, now I feel like they don't. And she's like, that's something that I'm so present to and aware of now. And I said, yeah, I'm like, I get that. And I'm like, and I love that you said, you're like, it's okay to be going through this, not give, all the fucks, but also want to feel like that. It's okay. It's okay to feel this way. Because I think we're told it's not,
We are. And to take it a step further, an extrapolation of that is the major gaslighting that happens in medicine of women in this age period. And this is where it gets dangerous, because that translates into the aging gracefully message. Okay. So there's this theme of aging gracefully. And I see this a lot. Like I have advertisements and things for my program, and there's people who are like, I'm so excited, I want to hear more. And then there's pushback from these people who are like, this is toxic, telling people that they should look a certain way or that their skin appearance matters. At this age, we should value ourselves and be willing to age gracefully. And I'm like, yeah, we should. And did I say, like, this doesn't have to be important to you. It's okay. If that doesn't resonate, I'm not for you and whatever. Or I am, and we don't have to focus on that. So I think that there's a lot of, anyway, the mixed messaging aside, there's this way that we've been told that we have to age gracefully. And that means just accepting that this is a natural part of life. And we're told that by our medical providers. So women consistently tell me, I went to my, gynecologist or my MD, said, I'm having these symptoms. I think it's perimenopause. Can we talk about some hormone replacement? Is that an option for me?
Yeah.
And I often hear something like the practitioner says, well, you're still cycling, so I don't feel confident about that right now as a strategy for you. Oh,
I hear
God,
that a lot
one.
too.
Or just like, this is just what happens and you're just going to have to suffer through it. We all go through it and this is just how it is and it's part of aging. There's nothing more than that message that I find more disempowering and just like despise hearing, because it's so false, and and not just false like by my clinical experience, but false by what all the studies show. Like literally there's lots of things we can be doing now, hormones and then some, that can totally change. We have so much empowerment to change how we go in this, from here on out, as this, like, we're on this runway, right, for the rest of our life. And we have choice and influence about how that goes. It's not this inevitable slide into decay and disease and degeneration and irrelevance in society. And why this is not a new principle is something that, like, I come from a Chinese medicine background as well as like a, biochem. And the Chinese medicine, like if you look at the ancient physicians, so there was this idea in Taoist Chinese medicine, which is really the roots, where you start life with a certain gas tank, and we call that how much jing, or like life energy material you have. And some people have good genetics, or like they have an 18-gallon tank, and some people have a 10-gallon tank. But how you nurture and use that energy, we use a little bit of that energy as qi to fuel every life activity we do. And you can burn through it fast or you can nurture it, right? So that's epigenetics. So there was an idea that we don't like lose qi as we age, which is actually in modern Chinese medicine how they describe it. But if you talk to the ancients, they say we just transmute jing, or that form of qi, into shen, or spirit, into wisdom. And so it's just matter can't be created or destroyed. And I love this concept because what they did was really organize themselves about how do we nurture and prolong jing and qi. And so there's stories, anecdotes that some of them live till like over 200 years, and, who knows, but basically they were focused back then about, okay, people die, and some people die then, and some people die then, and some people have disease and some people don't. And what is the difference? And they would observationally see, like, if people did X, Y, and Z, they did better. And if we give them these substances, like in the herbal pharmacopoeia, a lot of the substances that nurture jing and shen were like animal products and hormonal, so if they had been able to test hormones, or if they had been able to, use hormone replacement, now that we can refine that and make the body bioidentical versions that match ours, would they have used those? Absolutely. They would still have felt your tongue and pulse, but yeah, they used to taste urine as a way of testing, for what was in it. So anyway, I digress, but like this idea that we shouldn't be using every tool in our kit if we want to, and it's not about the number of years we're here on the planet, it's about how we get to live them. It's about wealth span and play span and how long we stay functional, because that's better for us. It's better for our families. It's better for society. It's better for Medicare. I mean, if you want to get like that about it. Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. Oh, so many things. Oh, and I apologize to everyone if you're hearing my dog bark. She saw somebody outside and is apparently protecting us. But anyhow, yeah. So it's interesting. One thing that, like, hearing you speak about all of this that comes to mind too is messaging. And that's messaging that we have gotten since we were little girls. And it became so present to me 2 days ago when I went to my daughter's first grade award ceremony. And literally now, and I understand that this is completely a function of where her teacher is in life. Her teacher is a baby boomer. She's retiring this year, and life for them has been very different than life for us, who are younger. If you're, a Gen X or a millennial or even a Gen Z, like life is very different for us, and how we are going through and perceiving the world is different. But she was giving out the awards, and this specifically was happening only with the girls. And she's like, oh, this one's getting an award because she's a perfectionist, and she tries to,
God.
Yes, exactly. So she tries to, like, if she doesn't do something perfect, she keeps on trying and trying and trying. And then she gave an award to my daughter. That one, she's like, oh, Everly's so meek and quiet. And I'm like, okay, A, you don't know this child because she's not that, but that's the way she feels at school because she's being shut down by not being allowed to show up as herself. And then there was another one who's like, the other one, oh gosh, what was the other one? There was a third one that I was just like, it's all the things, like be a good girl. Oh, she's nice. She's nice to everybody. And she puts everyone else's needs in front of her own. And I'm like, this is the bullshit that we're sending to our kids, our little girls. They're growing up with and it's being celebrated. Like, here, I'm actually giving you a physical award for not knowing your self-worth, right? Oh, I was losing it. And I'm just like, I was in my brain. I'm like hearing all these things and I'm like, we need to change this now. You know what I mean? Because then it manifests and evolves into the messages that weird.
Those are the seeds.
Yeah.
We all have those operating. I mean, I know you and I have both been deconstructing tapes that we operate on around that, and everyone in our generation and before us. And, I mean, it's so apparent.
So I'm just like, we need to change these narratives for our girls and for ourselves and for the future generations now, because it's not okay. It is not okay. You know what I mean? It's just like, it's nuts. And I'm so glad that you mentioned that stuff, because it needs to be heard. I mean, shout it from the rooftops. And I know there are more of us talking about it, but it's a message that needs to be heard. It's like, don't watch what's on the TV. Don't watch what's going on in social media. Cause I looked at the numbers, like the amount of money that women are spending on like straight up anti-aging and also like preventing menopause was like the two together combined to be almost $100 billion globally. Wow. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money to be fighting the system and fighting this transition. So I was just like, that's crazy stuff.
Yeah. Well, we don't have to fight it. We can just, have choice.
Yes, have choice and work with it instead of against it, because, with energetics, the more you push something away, the more you're going to get it back.
Absolutely. And there's so many upsides, like all that toxic messaging of like, you're going to lose your femininity, or you're going to dry up and shrivel, you're going to lose moisture, you're going to lose sexuality and sensuality and become, in the eyes of what's idealized in society, irrelevant or invisible. Like that story of like, and now you're this like old school image of a grandma. Not to knock grandmas. Grandmas are awesome and can be like hot and sexy and brilliant and, fully functional. I mean, not can be are. Okay. So anyway, but some old like cartoony thing about that. And I just think that we are, currently in a paradigm of rewriting that, but also, I'm intentionally role modeling that differently to my daughter, appropriately for her 5-year-old self. Right. But, there's so many opportunities that are like, okay, so just to name this, like we're talking about, I just did an Instagram series this week called Things We Love to Put in Our Vaginas.
Oh, I saw that. Yeah. It was awesome.
Yeah. And it's like, let's talk about that part. Cause there's this stigma or this like taboo about talking about the sex, no one wants to talk about like, oh my God. And then, sex after menopause. And it's like, okay, yeah. Like if you're not doing things to shift the hormones needed, then yes, there will be some vaginal atrophy and dryness and discomfort. And some women will experience that more than others in symptomology. And there can be changes in the pH and therefore how we smell and all these kinds of things, right? So, and more tendency towards infections and
right.
But it doesn't need to be that way. And I think that that's such a critical piece of our identity. Like if men were walking around going through menopause and all of a sudden their testicles shriveled up and then they had, no testosterone and no erection and no ability to orgasm, like the U.S. would come to a grinding halt.
Yes, 100%.
It would be like, fuck the press.
Yes, totally.
So this matters. And it's just another way that our body sends us this little email about, hey, like, this is what's going on and you can like help me here. And so there's all these tools and things that are like ways we can, work with that. There's hormones to work with that. But also it's not all this bad doom and gloom story about that. It's also like, hey, remember that part where you're like more comfortable with who you are, you know yourself better, and you're like, not so worried about these other things. Well, like, a lot of women find that this moment in their life is when they're like, have this whole revival of like their sensual identity and sexual identity. And they're like, I want to try some new things, or like, actually, this is what I like. And like, and so there's this whole like amazing, like, this is not the end of the story. This is like the launch pad to a whole nother.
Yes. And the honoring of the self, like honoring yourself. Like, I feel like it's, the world is giving you permission to honor yourself through this transition, because it's okay. It's okay to like, and I think it's like, we were talking about it this weekend, like being cognizant of the fact that there was younger self and then there's older self. And now we're kind of in this gray space of what is the middle part? Like, what is this transition and what does it look like? And I love the way that you were speaking to like it can be whatever you want it to be. You can be what it needs to be for you, like giving people permission that, just show up and get what you need, which is amazing. I love that. So you kind of alluded to this already, but I really, really wanted to talk about this because I had seen you post, and it's something that you and I have talked about for a long time, is, the elephant in the room that is hormones, but specifically estrogen, because I feel like in the transition time, everyone's like progesterone, progesterone, progesterone. And estrogen has gotten this bad rap, but you and I know that it's not like the devil that the media and medicine will make it out to be, right? But everyone's like, and here's something that I think you can do a great job of clarifying. Progesterone is great, yes, but lots of women have problems with progesterone, and estrogen is absolutely amazing and can be very helpful for women in the transition of perimenopause and in menopause. So I will give you the floor to speak about that.
Where do I want to start about this? This is one of my heart topics, especially right now. So I guess what I'll say is, so first of all, I want to talk about where all that fear came from. What I want to say, so that fear, the message we got that estrogen is dangerous, estrogen and exogenous hormones cause cancer. That's the big fear, and cause cardiovascular events. That came largely from a couple of studies, but the Women's Health Initiative primarily, that was run in the 90s and 2000s. And that was a study that was a branch of the nurses study that was looking at just tons of women, 23,000 participants across 40 clinics. And they were looking at many, many factors. They were looking at the benefits of hormone replacement in women going through menopause, but they weren't looking at cancer. It wasn't a study on cancer. It was a study on, all kinds of other issues and mortality and stuff. And so basically what happened was the study was flawed in that it wasn't designed to detect cancer. The results were unreliable. They didn't look at the age or smoking history or HRT history in the groups. And then what happened was they interpreted the data that came out of that incorrectly. And what they didn't see was that women who used hormones 80% of the time up until the age of the study had a 32% decreased risk of breast cancer and 40% lower risk of mortality if they did get breast cancer in terms of mortality. And that's what the numbers actually showed. But what happened was that in a group that was the control group or the treatment group, what happened was that they looked more closely. There was a detection bias. So basically they looked for breast cancer more in the treatment group than in the control group and didn't control for the factors driving it. Like, for example, the fact that these women had been on progestins, which are artificial progesterones, which we know are carcinogens. So bottom line of all that, tech speak, is that the interpretation initially that said, oh, there's more breast cancer in this group, let's stop this study, was actually flawed interpretation. But the media loves fear, so they ran with it. And the message we got in the US was hormones are dangerous, estrogen is dangerous. Everybody started pulling people off hormones. And what we saw was several generations of women who are now, struggling with dementia and bone loss and fractures and shortened life and more cancer because of it. And so that study, the interpretation was actually redacted and rewritten by the actual authors of the study, among many other groups. That wasn't really, the media didn't catch wind of that though. And so our counterparts, our contemporaries in much of Europe, basically looked at the data themselves and said, well, that's not what that's saying. And let's just use bioidentical ones and don't use progestins. And which is, by the way, the main hormone in birth controls. So in a lot of Europe, they actually will incentivize. They'll give you tax credits if you're a woman over a certain age who's willing to use hormone replacement, which is all bioidentical over there, because just statistically, it lowers the burden on the Medicare system.
Wow.
So they're like,
I didn't know that.
I mean,
it's amazing.
Oh yeah. Yes. And we did not do that. And so we have radically higher rates of all the diseases that we'll talk about. So a month ago, a study came out. It was published in early April, and it was the largest study of its kind. So it was 10 million women that they tracked over the age of 65 who had used estrogen replacement and other forms of hormone replacement. And they were very, very specific about the dose, how long, the route of administration, the form, and then the rates of disease. And so basically what they found was that there was a 300% reduction in the rate of 5 kinds of cancers, 2 of which were known estrogen-driven or estrogen receptor positive cancers, breast and uterine, if women were taking estrogen replacement. Let's repeat that. You had much lower risk of getting cancer if you took hormone replacement. Estrogen helps prevent cancer. Okay. The second thing was if you did get cancer, if you were a woman who happened to get cancer while on these hormones, your survival rate was much higher and your rate of relapse after treatment was lower. If you did relapse and have another reoccurrence of cancer rather, then your survival rates were much higher and your outcomes of treatment were much better as well. So basically, there's all of that information. There's also information about lower risk of cardiovascular events, less bone loss, and also increased longevity. So what they found was that women over the age of 65, a group that we used to be told shouldn't be on hormone replacement because it was going to give them heart attacks and strokes, had lower rates of heart attacks and strokes, and also had 21% more longevity than their contemporaries not on hormone replacement. So basically, if you take hormone replacement, you will have on average 19 to 21% more longevity and less death from all cause, lowered mortality from any cause of disease. We also know that estrogen replacement, as well as other, hormone replacement, helps prevent and reduce rates of dementia. It can actually be used to treat it in the early stages and reverse it. Same thing with osteoporosis and penia, bone loss. And then for me, really importantly, the shrinking of the brain. So there's a loss of brain matter, the gray matter, after menopause. And on average, I think 30 or 34%. That's a huge part of our brain, right? And the place that suffers the most is the hippocampus. And so basically that's where we have our memories and the parts that make us who we are and all that. So those things are very important, right? So basically, if we want to prevent those diseases, so our bodies, when we are young and have the most hormones, we are pretty disease free. Our rates of disease are much lower in general than our older parts of the population, right? Generally, what the difference is that at those ages, we have high levels of hormones. And we know from studies that the things associated with longevity, like people who live to 100, 110, have higher levels of DHEA, lower mortality with higher DHEA, and muscle mass, stronger muscle mass, maintained well.
And you need hormones for that muscle mass, right? You need hormones for that muscle mass.
Hormones keep tissue young, functional, and disease-free. And so if we can stay more functional and disease-free, lower disease rates, why not use those things, especially knowing that they help us prevent some of the things we're afraid of getting and increase our outcomes if we do have to deal with those things.
I know. It's so interesting because for me specifically, close to my heart is the cardiovascular disease part of it. And it was funny because I had been on the patches, the estriol patches. And, our friend Sherry, she looked at my hormones and she's like, what are you doing? She's like, why are you taking this? And I was like, oh, so-and-so put me on it. And she's like, no, she's like, with your family history, you need to be on estradiol because that's where all of the hormone research says that you get the cardio benefit. But most practitioners, even I would say hormone informed clinicians, don't know that or they're afraid of it. And it's interesting because then another friend of ours, in the functional medicine space, found out that I was on that. And they're like, oh my God, I want to take you off of it right now. That's so horrible. And I went back and forth with it. It was a him. And so I was like, I went back and forth with him. And I was just like, there's tons of research. And I told him where to go find the research. And he was still not really having it. It was so weird. It was like, okay. But the funny thing was, I wanted to be like, you can change your mind because you went from practicing strictly conventional medicine to functional medicine. And then I'm like, this is just another step on the journey. I'm like, and I encouraged him to go look at the research and inform himself on that stuff because I know he does a lot of work with women's hormones. And I'm like, it's to me, anytime I think, yes, but it's like if you, and even in the back of my mind, if I thought I was doing a patient a disservice, I'm like, I couldn't do that. I'm like, I feel like I need to be educated on all that stuff. So
absolutely,
it's crazy. Yeah.
And to your point, a lot of people, our nuance in the understanding of hormones is changing. And it is so important to work with someone who's really informed because so personally, yes, estradiol is going to get you, here's why. We have different receptors for different estrogens in different tissues. And we have different receptors for the metabolites of those. So there's ER alpha, ER beta. And the thing is that in all honesty, you want both. So I tend to use combinations of things. Like when someone's earlier in the perimenopausal window, estriol is arguably a better and safer form because their estradiol is bouncing around all over the place, and you're unlikely to make someone estrogen dominant using localized topical estriol. All the research, by the way, showed that it was much better to use the hormones transdermally and in lower dose. So use them, but don't use crazy doses. And the thing is that we now have delivery forms where you don't need a higher dose. You can actually more efficiently get it across the skin and into the blood. So anyway, but I like estriol, and estriol is what we have the most receptors for in our reproductive tract. So when you're working with someone who's got like loss of continence or frequent UTIs, or they have vaginal, concerns, or loss of clitoral sensitivity, or any of those things, that's estriol.
Oh, that's an interesting distinction.
I'm going to be, so I use it there already. I'm 40. How old am I? Sorry. I'm going to be 46. And I use it on my face because, it's like, why not support the collagen and the structure and the moisture and the tone texture? So I don't use a huge amount. Let's be, it's dosed correctly. But
I was just going to say, do you put like a little pump in your moisturizer, that type of thing? Okay. Yeah. That's easy.
Or just dab it, where I want it. Yes. And the other things are, though, that eventually in the menopausal sequence of things, then usually I'm going to do biest and then a little estradiol. And these things get sequenced as we it's like you're gradually shifting. So we're gradually shifting. And so, but we need that estradiol. So there's, this story, like we can only use estriol. God, we're another disservice, right? So we're getting there slowly. And in 20 years, the hormonal landscape is going to look different. But it's also like estrogen is great, but we need these other things too, like we should also be, we need DHEA, we need progesterone like crazy. And we need at some point, possibly people can benefit from testosterone, although arguably if you
I was just going to ask you
high,
that.
you may not need it. I think it's great.
Yeah. I
also have found that I often don't need it if I have gotten a handle on the DHEA and other hormone balance and worked on the corollary body systems, because the whole thing, something that we're missing is that a lot of women go like, my doctor tested me, my hormones are fine. And kudos that their doctor was even willing to test them because, but also blood levels aren't so ideal because hormones are made on cholesterol backbone fat. So they are fat loving, and water, blood draws our serum, which is water based. And so we're only seeing really the hormones that are being bound to carrier molecules as much. And it's valuable. I don't think blood tests are worthless, but I just think, I'll often look at the urinary metabolites that way. And so there's reasons why. So a couple things are, number one, anyone who's working with women during this phase and doing hormone replacement, if they don't understand that testing has limited utility, period, end of sentence, doesn't know what they're talking about. And the reason for that is twofold. One, our estrogen in the middle of perimenopause is predictably doing puberty in reverse, which is this roller coaster of spikes and drops of estradiol at any given time during the month. And you're going to ovulate one month and not another. So you really can't ever take a test and say, this is what your hormones are doing. It's like, this is what your hormones were doing then. And it can give us some clues. And does that match the tracked symptoms of your hormones? That, I have hormone trackers that I do repeatedly with women to make sure that things are improving and we're going in a direction, because when their hormones are more balanced, their symptoms get better. And then that's useful as a time to test because you can go, oh, this is your baseline where you feel good. Let's continue to have that be the target, as you move forward and your body is making less and less, assuming that they're in safe range and also that they are metabolizing them well.
Yes. Oh, that's the key, right?
The metabolites. If you're going to give someone hormones and you don't have a way to test metabolites or you don't know what those mean, send them to somebody who does, please, because we have to look at what your body is doing with that. And that comes down to the corollary body systems that I think are quintessential parts of hormone optimization, which are the, basically micro gut health and our detox pathways / oxidative stress, right? So that stuff is part of my program that's built in. It's you can't just do hormones. You're missing the mark and people don't get the results they want. Because what they want is to look and feel better. And you can't really do that if you don't address it.
And then the genetics, right? Right?
And the
genetics part of the detox, right? For people like women.
Yeah, the genetics piece is huge. Yeah, if you have COMT or you have SUOX or yes, 100%. And the other piece of that is, so personalized. It has to be personalized is what you and I are saying. Yeah. The other piece though, that even I wasn't really present to be honest, until the last couple of years, was that so hormone activity in tissue is as much about do we have adequacy of hormone availability in circulation as what are the hormones getting in the receptor sites. And so if your receptor sites are not taking up your picture perfect level of hormones on your testing, you're still going to feel like you don't have enough hormones. Okay, so what does that mean? What happens and what do we do about it? And so basically it comes down to a couple of factors. The first factor is that we need certain nutrient cofactors to allow hormones to get into those receptors. So, simple things like having enough zinc. The second thing is that our own hormones can block the hormone receptors. So if we're under a ton of stress and our cortisol is through the roof all the time, or we're inflamed and our cortisol is through the roof, or we're insulin resistant and our cortisol is through the roof, then what happens is our body, because cortisol is a survival hormone, we can't live without it, will preferentially take up the cortisol into those receptor sites, and it will block hormones like estrogen, progesterone, and thyroid hormone. So you can have an apparent feeling of low thyroid without actually being low thyroid. And then also there's the endocrine disruptors. So all the toxins, those act as more potent estrogens, and those get in those receptor sites and elicit their own activity and block the benefit. They don't have the beneficial effects of our hormones. And so then we have all these negative side effects with this overall higher disease risk. It's just a mess. And so the detox piece, it's not a joke. Like, we have to always be promoting a lifestyle. And I have some supplements I like to use that whenever someone's on hormones, to kind of make sure we're ongoing supporting the receptor sites, Oh,
absolutely.
So those are all reasons.
Yeah. I have a question that I get from my patients a lot, and I would love to hear your answer to it. But it is, when you want to approach your prescribing doctor, if you are, like, let's say if you're a provider and you can't prescribe and you want to get on like a form of like hormone replacement, a bioidentical hormone replacement, how do you tell women to approach having that conversation with their prescribing provider?
Yeah, it's a tough one. So a lot of women we have to arm ourselves with data. We have to hopefully be working with someone who will listen and be open to what the science says. We may need to switch providers, or we might need to have more than one provider. We might need to go to someone who does that part and then go to that doctor for on the ground well care and other things. What I would say is that the data, there's studies that show that the earlier in the perimenopausal transition we start hormone replacement or augmentation, that the more bang you have for your buck, meaning that you have far exponentially more benefit in the things we talked about: cardiovascular, cancer prevention, insulin resistance, and metabolic shifts, which are related to low hormone levels in that age range, bone loss, brain function, like all of that stuff. You get more benefit later in life the earlier you start. That doesn't mean we should be giving people who are 35 estrogen, like, as a matter of routine. That's not what I'm saying. But if you have symptoms suggesting your hormones are changing and some labs to kind of at least correlate with that, there's not a reason that based on whatever number of age you are, that it's okay or not okay to start. So I very routinely have women in my practice starting some level of hormone replacement in their late 30s. The first things I'm usually using is bioidentical progesterone and often some DHEA, and then making sure the thyroid's looking good and addressing that if needed in all the ways we do that. So those are the first things. And those things can be done in this very graduated way. It's not like everybody goes on a standard dose, not at all. Your need for progesterone at 38 is going to look radically different than your need for progesterone at 55, and in you versus your bestie, So I'm liberal with progesterone for many reasons. And then, and so what I'll say is, like, I actually think that, so there's different delivery forms for different hormones, and most of those are prescription and some of them are not. And I think that there are pros and cons to all of those. And much like when we have like a thyroid patient who's like, for a long time, there was this like, everybody should be on the natural glandular Armour. And, that was disastrous, because there's some people who thrive on Armour and there's some people who are like, that made me crazy. I need Synthroid. And it's like, you know what? If they do better on the synthetic, it's not toxic. So, okay. Right. And so I think we have to get out of this like blinders on mentality of this is good and this is bad, and look at what works and what has the lowest risk to benefit. Right. So I think that transdermal hormones, the data is clear that transdermal is better, like not taking oral. Even in the instance of progesterone, I think it's fine to take oral bioidentical progesterone. I haven't seen a lot of data that suggested it was in any way harmful. but it is just, we have to use a lot of it because it's not absorbed well through the gut. And so it's just a higher amount going to the liver. It's another thing the liver has to process. So because we can do in most women a more efficient and effective thing by doing a topical transdermal application with that, I think that's great. I also like topical hormones because we can kind of put them where we want them. For example, like if we need vaginal estrogen, we can do vaginal estrogen, and then we can have other hormones go other places. So, so, there estradiol patches can be very valid and useful. Some women respond really well to those. Some people have reactions to the adhesives. Some people just find that they don't feel good on those. And so the thing is that every time we use an application, we have to evaluate what's right for that person. And there's women. So in my practice, I can't prescribe those. And I use the transdermal liposomal gel forms, which are available over the counter. And I love them. And I can't tell you how many countless women I've transitioned from whatever they were being given. Like, oh, they had an estradiol patch and maybe 100 milligrams of progesterone. And they were like, this is not cutting it. And we did this other thing. And they were like, oh my God, I felt great, thanks. Or we augmented what they were given or something, right? And that can be a great way to use those. I like that they can be graduated because they're a topical. You can use more or less.
I love that too.
Without having to get a whole new prescription for something. I don't love creams. It's not that they're bad. I think that some people do well on them. I think they get stuck in the cutaneous fat, the fat layer, and then they dump erratically into the blood. I don't think it's as predictable in terms of it getting where we're trying to get it. And I also think that they can contaminate other individuals more easily. And the third thing is that they fall out of suspension. Like, they're mixed usually in a compounding lab, but then depending how long the person has it, like one pump might have a different amount than another pump later down the bottle. And
inconsistencies
so not my favorite. I also don't love pellets because I've seen so many women come into my practice having been given pellets, well intended. And the what happens is a pellet is going to be strongest when you insert it. And when it's time for a new one, you're getting lower hormone levels. So women tend to do this kind of like, and they feel it. And I'm like, why? Why do that when we just have this just as easy, if not easier, like no one has to have a surgical implant of a thing embedded under their skin. The other thing is once you do that, you can't get it out. So it's like, once it's in there, and you just gotta wait it out if it doesn't feel good. I'm not a big fan of that. I think some people love them and that's okay. They're also not wrong, just not my favorite for most people.
Same. Yeah. I've seen some of the issues that you're talking about in practice with people who've had the pellets. Yeah. Yeah. That's tough. Yeah. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
I'll have a lot of people who come to my practice just for the hormone piece. Like maybe they even have another functional practitioner they're doing great gut work with, or like something with their whatever other thing, like they're working on tapering off antidepressant meds or like skin stuff or whatever it is. And I love doing that where I'll just like jump in to do this piece and then they can like, it just works well. It segues with what they're doing. And so I think in general, why I'm saying that is that there are people out there who do this well and you can just do that, even if you're like, but I have someone, it doesn't have to be an either or.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's huge. Like I think you and I have realized this, but like we each have our own wheelhouse, right? And we know what we're good at. And so for a long time, I refer out for those things that I know aren't kind of my wheelhouse and my specialty. So yeah, it's totally good. Especially when you have like a great provider, maybe that provider is not amazing at hormones, to like send them to that person to a hormone provider or whatever it is that your doctor or provider might not be the best at.
Oh yeah. And I think with functional medicine too, like we're kind of in a field that's evolving, but like, it's like now we don't always need to get this segmented because there's been problems because of this. But like, if you get a broken bone, you don't go to a podiatrist, right? Like in Western world. So although yes, functional medicine is a whole body system and all of us trained in functional medicine should understand those, it's still true that like people who do women's health aren't going to have the knowledge in like maybe necessarily treating like psoriasis that like, so like, for example, like I would frequently, I would treat some patients, but at a certain point or when you were really specialized in skin or even the peds, like I would do some of those. And then once it was outside of my knowledge base, I was like, you know what, this person does this day in and day out. Or for example, like now with the trauma work and the mind body stuff, I know a lot about that, but I love sending people your way. Because, it's one thing to get the physiology dialed in and work on the hormone piece and to be able to recognize when something needs addressing, and having your hormones on straight can give you the bandwidth to then go have the capacity to do that work, but it's not a replacement.
Interesting you bring up like the trauma work and that piece of it now, because one thing that I've always wanted to ask you, and I'll ask you right now, is Something that I've seen the trend in my practice is women who are going through perimenopause and menopause. I feel like if they have not resolved a lot of that emotional and trauma work, it manifests bigger. And it translates to like, and emerges as irritability and anger and rage and a lack of knowing themselves, like just feeling like I don't know who I am or the person I've become. And I feel like if we, like you said, start addressing all of this earlier, like, you know, we were talking about looking at your like mid 30s and start, you know, taking notice and transitioning the maybe like low level hormones and optimizing the gut and detoxification, but also really honoring your path and your journey and your trauma and your emotions. Like doing all of that will also make the transition better. How have you seen that? Like, I feel like women are like, I woke up one day and I was just filled with rage and anger and irritability.
Oh my God, I see this all the time. Yes, of course I do. You see, it's undeniable. It's there. And I think my brain went in 6 directions. When you brought this up, I was like, I wish I need more time. That's the ADHD part. So, okay, a couple of things. These are things that came to mind was sometimes whatever we've experienced that would fall under the umbrella of traumatic or unresolved traumas are things that happened that were outside of our control. But then there's also these like ongoing smaller traumas or recurrent traumas where the places that we've abandoned ourselves or gaslit ourselves. And there's a certain amount of trauma resolution that involves like showing up for ourselves and also forgiving ourselves for not having shown up. And as much as we can also then have that experience with people around us too. So I find that the reality of that, the felt reality of that becomes undeniable when we're a little bit more naked and vulnerable because the hormone support and buffer is a little less. I think that's how I would language that. And I think the first change has to do simultaneously, like we know from studies that people who experienced like a lot of childhood trauma, just say like high ACE scores, have different set points for their cortisol secretion. And also for their their adrenaline, and so their epinephrine, norepinephrine will like hit faster, right? And that makes sense. That was a survival strategy. Our body's always got our back. Like our body is doing the best because it's saying we should expect these things, be prepared to react to those things, right? And we can talk about that in terms of attachment. There, like we can go all over
so many things,
right? Yeah. But so as it relates here, I think that what happens is that a lot of times those of us who have that patterning are having more cortisol responses. And so you can biochemical it and go like, oh, okay, women who have more dysregulated HPA axis and lower cortisol flexibility and reserve are going to have a harder time going through perimenopause, menopause because of the way that our adrenal hormones really pick up the slack where our sex hormones start to fall off later on. Like if we have adequacy of DHEA, it can become estrogen and testosterone to some extent, buffering that downslide, right? Just as simple as that. And cortisol, if we're emphasizing cortisol, happens at the expense of progesterone. So the sudden crash in progesterone happens harder and hits harder. So there's those pieces. And then there's the other piece that's about like, okay, when our progesterone is declining in the beginning stages and then all through the rest of this, just naturally and healthfully, that's not like a disease or a problem or a result of something. Progesterone allows us to uptake our GABA. Among other things, it plays a role a little bit with serotonin and some other stuff. But basically progesterone, you can think of it like that. Progesterone equals our grounded, calm, in our skin, happy, calm, sleep, go to sleep, rest and calm your mind hormone. As evidenced by anyone who's ever been pregnant, you're like, by trimester 3, when your progesterone's kicking strong, you're like, whoosh. I mean, you might not feel good or you might, but like that grounded thing is undeniable, right? So when we start to lose that, we start to lose our chill, like it's kind of like, where did my Xanax go? Like literally, it's our natural body's way of giving us that anti-anxiety. And when we don't have that, we feel everything more.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's huge. I just noticed it with like, I started, when I would be doing the first appointment with people, I was just like, okay. I'm like, all the women who are like perimenopausal and menopausal are talking about this rage and like this just like irritability and just, yeah. And it's all due to a lot of what you're talking about. But that's when I have the conversation and I'm like, we don't have to address this right now. We can address it wherever you are. I'll meet you where you're at on your journey. But yeah, there are things that you're holding on to that you need to address. And that was something that was like abundantly aware, made me abundantly aware this weekend was like, we were talking about that self-abandonment. And I hadn't really thought about it in terms of that, but it's something that we do. We do it as, like you said, kind of like a form. It's like self-preservation. When you're in the fight or flight mode, right? It's self-preservation. But then recognizing it, and then also being able to forgive yourself for that. And I think that was a big shift for me, like that forgiving myself. Yeah.
We're in a journey of being more authentic to who we are in this moment. And that is not authentic to who we are. It's often like, to your point of your story about your daughter and the awards and some tape we were told, like, be like this. And that's success or survival. Right. And so we're going like, nah, like, wait a minute. That is so not true. And it hasn't been true. And why was I acting like that was true? And so there is a good positive side, because where there's discomfort, it allows for us the opportunity to create change and more impetus to do the change, right? And so we all know that we can't label things as good or bad. They just are. It's about how we meet them, whether we're going to, create friction and struggle more and suffer more, or if we're going to go with what's happening and what our being is asking of us. And I think that the hormones and the like trauma piece, it's bidirectional, like if you haven't dealt with the things that are unhandled, or gotten the support to be able to do that or start it, even if you're like, I don't even know what that means. The hormone stuff, like someone can come to me and work with like the hormones, the detox. And it's not that they shouldn't be doing it yet. It's not like you got to do this first. But if you don't do it, it's not going to like get the full effect in the ways we're looking for. But simultaneously, I find that a lot of people just don't have the space to do that work until we get them on some hormones and they go like, okay, now I feel like I can even be here with this without just being re-traumatized.
I think that's the really important piece, is meeting people where they're at on the journey. Because this weekend I had heard some people saying, well, this is the way that it has to go. You have to deal with the physical body before you can deal with the emotional body. And I, thought to myself, it's not like for me, I'm like, and some people will say vice versa, right? No, you have to do the, emotional, spiritual trauma before you do the physical stuff. And I said, no, you need to do what the person needs. Like, and it can look many different ways. It doesn't have to be either or. It can be all of it, and meeting the person where they're at on their journey. Because like you said, especially with the kind of perimenopause and menopause, I know a lot of women who, like, once they get all of that under control and their baseline has been raised and their threshold for intolerance for everything and their resilience has been raised, then they are open to being able to do that work and like recognizing it. And it's, it's kind of like a beautiful unfolding.
Totally. Oh my gosh. Yes. Yeah, it is. It's wonderful to watch. It's kind of like, that made me think about how a lot of people say like, oh, like you got out of this relationship and you had like this and that and the other, and you need to like, do your work for a while. But sometimes sometimes that's true. And sometimes what's true is we do the work of healing the stuff from the last relationship in relationship. So it's just exactly, it's just different. It's
the main underlying message is there's no right way.
No right way
you need to do what is best for you. Yeah. Cause I've heard that messaging too from a lot of people. Yeah. Like just throughout life. And yeah, you can't push people. You just need to let them go through their journey, because we're all on this earth walking our journey and, in our own truth. And we're all at different points. We're all at different points of that journey. And that's something that I have been able to like really recognize, is that, yes, I am at a place, and I was somewhere else before, like my past, I always want to say past versions of myself, because it's like always evolving into like your new self and your new identity. But like a year ago, I was different from who I am now, 5 years ago, really different from who I am now, and that's, like I said, it's like, it's a beautiful journey and it's a beautiful transition. And it can be very difficult to watch somebody else like seeming as if they are like harming themselves, or they could easily get out of a difficult situation, but that's not ours to judge. It's not ours to judge or to do something about. Like, they have to want to change and want to, do something about it. And if, their life's journey is that they're in that spiral forever, then that's what it is.
Absolutely. So true. That was some truth right there.
Right. Right. Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad that You came on today because I adore you and we could have this conversation forever. So we'll definitely have to have you back on again very soon. But go ahead. I would love for you to share with the audience where they can find you and anything like if you have anything that you want to share with them.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. And oh my gosh, this was wonderful. I know how it is with you and I, like we could just talk for hours. So
hours, literally.
This was so much fun. Yeah. So I am very easy to access on Instagram and Facebook. I definitely hang out in those social profiles and respond to people directly if you message me. I love chatting with people in the comment threads or in my DMs. You can always email my office if you're trying to get a hold of me more for professional support directly, and we can give that contact for the show notes. And also then the main thing that I'm offering at this point is my reverse age method program, which is actually a 6-month group program. It's for women at any stage of perimenopause or menopause who really want to have help identifying and personalizing programs to address and reprogram those underlying core anti-aging body systems, get their symptoms worked out. It involves both myself and labs and protocols, but also a really great personal trainer nutritionist who herself is a woman who is 10 months postpartum and has worked with people age 18 to 80. And so we have all the pieces. It's very comprehensive and we handhold all the way through and walk you through taking those steps to get those changes, but then also really importantly, we have a transition phase to understand, like, how do I maintain this in the next decades of my life? Where do I go from here? So that's kind of the main way I'm working with people. And I do have some free resources that will provide I have a text tips for women in perimenopause that you can get on. And it's like about 1 message a week. And I also have a mini version of my cookbook with recipes that are easy and quick to make because we all have stuff to do and are really well formatted for what our bodies are asking for during this phase. And so we'll provide the links for those too.
Yes. Yeah. We'll have the links in the show notes. So again, thank you so much. And it was wonderful to have you. And I can't wait for the next time that we have you on.
Likewise. Yeah, I can't wait. Thank you, Steph.
If you made it this far, I truly appreciate you. Remember, knowledge is just the beginning. Taking action is what truly sparks change. If you're overwhelmed and don't have enough energy to make it through the day, I invite you to book a free 20-minute coaching call with me. It's a no-obligation chat where we can discuss your health goals and how I might be able to help you achieve them. Visit the link in the episode description to book that call. Until next time, keep striving for wellness and remember, you have the power to not just survive, but thrive in motherhood.